Hey guys, so there's actually going to be an event on Jupiter tonight, and I thought this was a good opportunity to show you my full process. So Ganymede over there on the right is actually going to get eaten up by Jupiter's shadow, and I want to see if I can record that event. So this video is going to go over my entire planetary process and some stuff that you should consider for yours. So let's hop straight into it. So one of the most important parts to a proper planetary session is going to happen before you even leave, and that's proper planning. So there might be certain targets or certain events that you want to aim for that may or may not be available all the time. So knowing whenever these things occur is incredibly important, and how good things are is incredibly important. So Stellarium here is a fantastic resource. You can fast forward or rewind in time to check days, months, or even years out in advance when specific things are going to be happening and what things will look like. So for example, here with Jupiter, I am also aiming for a specific occurrence on the 13th, the night of the 13th right here, to happen, where I want to try and capture a eclipse here with Europa, with the spot and the shadow, and then also Io coming over here getting eaten by the shadow of Jupiter, just like we're trying to catch with Ganymede. So this is a fantastic resource. You can check over on all the planets, see how high above the sky they are going to be, everything. You can turn off atmosphere, turn on stars, you know where all of your coordinates are. It's just a fantastic resource. And on top of all of that information, there's a bunch of customizable stuff too. So over here in the top right, you have some settings, and you might see this red box right here. That is actually a telescope simulator of what my camera sensor specifically for my setup is going to see. So if I click this little tool right here in the top right, it allows me to set up certain eyepieces, lenses, sensors, and telescopes so that I can create this red box and see specifically how things are going to fit within my framing. So I've got my Celestron 6SE here with my ZWO ASI 120MC. The specific parameters that you're going to need to input here are going to vary. You might have to look them up from some manufacturer data sheets or just things available online, but you can set all the stuff up. So I've got my settings all here in the top right, everything with my two 2x Barlow lenses, and this is what the view is going to be for Jupiter. For my planetary stuff in particular, we're actually going to crop this down a little bit so we're closer into the planet in order to maximize our frame rates, but this is a fantastic resource and I encourage all of you to check this one out. On top of just availability and everything though, there's one thing that you absolutely also need to check for, and that is the weather. Oh, the weather. Bad weather can absolutely destroy any hope of getting a good planetary image, so making sure we're in good pockets is crucial here. We want to make sure there's no clouds, because even sometimes when you can see the planet through the clouds, it's going to decrease the brightness, which in order to get your good saturation on your histogram for good data collection, you would have to increase the exposure, which is going to hurt your frame rate, which is going to hurt the overall end quality of your images. Additionally, we want to have really, really low wind when we can, so there's not going to be as much atmospheric shimmer on our images whenever we're taking them. So Weather Underground is one that I typically like to use just because they have the charts, and I really like the charts for data visualization. Tonight's going to look really good. Some of the other days coming up are also going to look pretty good. So that looks really nice, but I never look at a single weather resource for whether or not it's going to be good, because that's steered me wrong before. But another really good one that I like is Clear Sky Chart. Clear Sky Chart is excellent because it's actually based a little bit more for astronomy, and they have a little bit of data that you can't necessarily find in some other weather places. So there's cloud cover, which is pretty obvious, but there's also transparency and seeing, which are critically important depending on what specifically you're going for. Transparency relates to DSOs, so for this video we'll stick to seeing, but seeing in this case describes the atmospheric shimmer high up. So while these other forecasts might give you wind speeds down at the ground, this is going to give you a little better feeling of how turbulent the atmosphere is higher up. So we're going to be looking for typically 4 out of 5s or better. I don't really necessarily waste my time on really low seeing, because the images that you get are they're just not very good. Just trust me, don't bother with it. Just really try and hone in on these really good opportunities. Unfortunately, this forecast doesn't go as far out, but you can try and pick events really far out. Whenever it gets closer, you can check some of these 10-day forecasts to see, okay, like, is this going to work? And then as things get closer, you can also check on here. One last little resource that I like to also look at a little bit is the jet stream models on stormsurfing.com. So these have rough approximations of where the jet streams are over our area. So since I'm in the DFW area here, it's got a little forecast for us on when things are good and when things are bad. So we want there to be no indicators here, like nothing that's up in Canada in this in particular. But actually, the further south you are, or relative to me, the closer you are to the equator, the stiller the atmosphere typically is. So if you're down there, you're in luck. Everyone else, we're gonna have to deal with what we can get, but pretty far south as is. So hopefully you can find some good windows of opportunity. So let's fast forward to whenever we're actually getting ready to go out. And now that the time has finally arrived and hopefully the weather's still holding, there are actually a few things that we still want to check before we actually get out and go onto site, or just move our telescope outside if you have that option. We want to check our collimation firstly. We want to make sure that things aren't too rough, though. If you're just moving it outside, you typically don't have to deal with very much, but if you're moving it in your car, you may experience some shifts in that you'll have to correct when you're on site. Typically, the Newtonians that I've worked with have had greater susceptibility to vibrations, so I've had to recollimate them a little more often. With my Nexstar 6SE, I haven't yet had to recollimate that, which has been pretty nice, but I am driving on site, so I'm a little bit more susceptible to that. But on top of collimation, there's actually another really important thing, and that is temperature acclimation. So remember how we said there's a bunch of atmospheric shimmer caused by distortions in the atmosphere and turbulence up there? Well, you can actually experience quite a bit of disruption based on the temperature of your telescope and whether or not it's acclimated to the outside temperature. I actually did some videos earlier about Schlieren, where you can see the heat rising off of my hand, and just like the heat's rising off of my hand in those videos, the heat can rise off your telescope and distort the air in front and add some shimmer to your image, which decreases the quality. So we want to make sure that our telescopes have a ton of time to make sure that they're acclimated to the outside temperature. The speed at which telescopes actually acclimate is going to depend a little bit on what type of telescope you specifically have. If you have a Newtonian, those are really open, so those typically require substantially less time to acclimate, which is pretty nice. With Schmidt-Cassegrains and Maxitov-Cassegrains, those are pretty compact, not open, and have a fair amount of mass as well. So you want to give them extra time to acclimate. Since I drive to site, what I've actually been doing is putting my entire OTA and carry bag setup into the back of my trunk and just letting it sit there for at least 2 hours. But this is yet another thing that can get in your way. But while it's in there, you have plenty of time to do other stuff. You can pack up certain things. If you've got your cameras, you can make sure they're clean of dust and everything. One of my viewers actually pointed out in the cleaning that I was doing, in the last video, the dust was actually probably relatively close to the sensor, either on the sensor or on the glass just above the sensor. So just trying to make sure things are clean, making sure all your batteries are charged and everything. You don't want to be in that situation where you figured out that you've forgotten something and have to drive back if you're driving to site. So just make sure everything's good and you're all prepared. And then next thing, of course, we gotta put our telescope together. Try and set the legs up in a way where you know you can balance them easily. So I know there's a slope against this guy, second. This guy. So I've aligned it a little bit easier. I've put my actual OTA on the base, and now we're going to tighten some of these bottom screws in to make sure everything is nice and sturdy. Drop our little base on here as well and screw that in. And now with our telescope set up right there, we're gonna have to make sure that our tripod is nice and balanced before we go after Jupiter right there. That's the moon, and I believe that is Saturn, but you can barely see that. So I'm just using this little bubble level app right here and adjusting the legs based on how I can figure where the best is. So I'll lift this leg up, should decrease the X, yep. So we'll make that adjustment here. And with the telescope now in position, we can go ahead and grab our camera and slap that on right here. Should be nice and easy. I typically orient it with the USB cable facing up, but technically you can have it whatever way you want it and actually adjust it mid-go. So we are going to want to double check the alignment on our finder scope right here as well. But since we've got some bright targets in the moon and Jupiter, that shouldn't really be a big deal. So let's bust out the laptop. All right, so we've got everything wired up. Got my portable battery here for the laptop as well as the telescope, which we are now turning on right there. And we will boot in and align in just a moment. And we're just going to do a normal align here. So we're going to hit solar system align, and if it doesn't give you the option for custom site right here, then you want to hit back and it will give you that option. But we're going to hit yes, and it's going to ask for our longitude and latitude. Fortunately, we're going to be able to get those from, again, the Stellarium app. So we'll just pull that up and then put in your longitude and latitude. Then after the positional data, it's going to have some time questions for you. So just select your time zone and input the time. This is also findable in the Stellarium app for the specific time down to the second. This should be validated by satellite time, so you should be pretty accurate here. And it's going to use both of these parameters to figure out how it needs to help track. Do be aware whether or not you're on normal or daylight savings time, because it's going to ask you that right after. And then, of course, the date. And now we're going to turn on our red dot scope, which is just this side guy right here. And we should be able to get a dot. So hopefully, if everything's aligned, we should be able to just go straight to Jupiter. And have that work out for us, though I doubt this is going to be in perfect alignment, so we'll see whether or not that actually works. Because we may have to use the moon. But we'll figure it out. And now if we open our imaging program, which in my case I'm using SharpCap, and align roughly our finder on Jupiter, we should be able to locate this guy just a little bit. So the first thing we need to do whenever we open our program is we need to connect our camera. So you go to cameras in the top left. If you haven't identified a camera before, you probably need to rescan, but since I have mine, it should be right there. And now this is our live feed. Over on the right, we probably want to have our full frame, so our highest area here for finding this. our maximum gain setting, so all the way up to 100, and then somewhere in the center here for our exposure, just to find Jupiter. But we will now slew with our positional corrections here, and hopefully find us a Jupiter in this area. Oh, there it is. So with that, we can hit a enter and a line on our tracking. So this was a little bit messy of a tracking job, but now Jupiter should be relatively within the frame. We can do our corrections now. So for this guy, we want to check our histogram levels for actual setting in a moment, but what we're going to do, since all I've got is a single lens on there right now, is we are going to add a Barlow. And the reason why we've gone to these higher exposures right now is just to help us see it, but we will tune these out in just a little bit. So let's go ahead and add some Barlow lenses. Since we are Barlow stacking here, I typically only like to add one Barlow lens at a time, because it's a little bit difficult to find the specific focuses that we need if we do multiple at the same time. But ideally, if we've done it right and have it centered when we're just initially setting that in, we should have Jupiter in frame. So let me tighten that up real quick and see what we get. So tighten that up, tighten that up as well, and we still got Jupiter in frame. Very good. So this is still not quite where I want it right now. Depending on the brightness of the target, like if it were Saturn, you might actually want to be out here at a little bit lower resolution, but a little higher concentration for your light to pixel ratio. So what we're gonna do, since Jupiter is so incredibly bright, is we are going to add that second Barlow now. So we'll grab our Barlow number 2 right here and put that in our optical train. All right, now with both of those guys in, I have bumped up the exposure pretty dramatically, because with both in, we're likely to see some significant changes in our focus. So that appears to be Jupiter there. I'm going to use our focus adjustment knob right here in order to try and hopefully get us closer to actual focus here. So we're going in, and you can see the dust that I was unsuccessful in cleaning off of the lens there. But that looks all right there. We've got some good stuff going on right here. So ideally, oh, a little off target now. Oh, here we go. One thing that's really nice, if you can manage it for your imaging and stuff, is if you can actually hit motor speed down here and then select something like 3. So we're back on target here, but since we've got these really big dust spots, I am going to disassemble the sensor setup a little bit and try and clean the lens up a little bit more. So while that focus is good right now, I'm going to sort of mess it up to try and figure out how am I doing on dust. It looks like it's really concentrated in that bottom corner, so hopefully we will be able to clean that off. But here we go. But after my infinite battles with the nemesis that is dust, we are reasonably clean now. So we're gonna actually focus back in and try and find us a nice, clean focus. Though this itself is going to take quite a bit of tries to actually get correct. So I will iterate that and hopefully have a good focus here. Kyle from the future here with a quick edit. Finding the focus manually can be kind of difficult. There's not really a steadfast way to do it, so what I recommend doing is going past the focus in both directions and then kind of training your hand to approximate where that center point is, and then after each centering attempt, check the live feed and try and identify any like sharp features on the surface or things that you hadn't seen before that you're now able to. And after a couple tries, hopefully you'll have something decent, but over time you'll generally get more proficient at finding that focus. Okay, and fortunately I was able to get a relatively good focus relatively quickly. So that's all on the up and up and very nice. So now that we're finally relatively on frame, we can actually start tuning some of our settings. So for our color space here, we want to have raw 8. There's a couple different options here. We don't need that high of color depth though, so we don't really care about some of these other ones. We are color and we want raw 8. Then for the capture area, we're going to want to tune that down a bit, but for our histogram, which it looks like we've frozen up, so we're going to reconnect our camera and make sure that we are getting reasonable frames back. For determining our exposure time and gain, we always want 100 gain, but for the exposure time, we want to try and have our histogram pretty far, but not completely saturated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tune this down just a little bit, probably bring it down to 40 or so, and we can bring it up just a little bit more there. We want to have the histogram pretty covered, but we do not want saturation. Saturation is very bad, because if you are saturated on the setting, you're actually losing data, because the pixels are unable to contain the information that you're actually trying to acquire here. So that looks relatively good. Everything is okay for that. So what we're going to do now, I actually want to capture Ganymede, which is that guy right there. So I'm going to try and make our framing match that, and then from there actually just keep some things within the frame. So reducing this is actually a great help as far as trying to maintain faster frame rates. So let me set this up a little bit. We can actually do a custom one here as well. So in my case, I think I actually want a relatively vertical one, though we could also adjust the position of our camera, but since we're already in focus, I do not necessarily want to do that. So what we're going to do here is go up and set a custom size here. I want this guy to be probably 960 versus maybe 720. Okay. Something a little bit like that. Unfortunately, that angle is really biting us here, so I might actually adjust some of the positions in order to try and get us a little easier of a time here. But really minimizing this area is really, really nice if you can do it. So try and aim for that if you can. Here, in my specific case, I'm going to try and get a little bit greedy here. I'm going to try and hold that framing. So I'm going to be adjusting on my hand controller here and just moving to try and make sure that Jupiter remains within frame and Ganymede remains within frame. Fortunately, since we looked at Stellarium, I do know that Ganymede is going to get progressively closer to Jupiter, and the actual eclipsing of Jupiter and Ganymede is going to happen roughly at 1. So I've got a little bit of time, and we're just going to try and, I think, stay on target and be able to track that motion in as it gets to the eclipse. Sorry for the jumps. These bugs are all over me right now. And then one quick thing as well, for our capture settings, to actually capture your videos, you can do some settings up here for like quick capture. I typically like to do 2 minutes for some of these, though for the stuff we're doing particularly, it might actually be better to go with 90 seconds, because there's going to be a very short time that the moon Ganymede is actually going to be in that transition period between fully lit and completely within the shadow. So hopefully we can capture that. So let's move back into our position and start acquiring frames. Back into our position right about there. And that was a long, bug-ridden imaging session, but we got it. Tried to go see if I could get Saturn afterwards as well, but can't seem to find it. Don't want to bother with the bugs. So yeah, let's head back and start some processing. Hey guys, and now that we're back indoors, we're going to process a bunch of our data. So right here we've got our SharpCap output folder with all of our files for the night listed in chronological order with that little naming scheme. We have a ton of videos, all about 1 gig in size, partially due to the fact that I was doing 1.5 minute durations and all of them back to back. We actually have like 46 or so. So we've got a lot of data. And the first software we're going to need to use to process that data is going to be called AutoStakkert right here. AutoStakkert, like all the other software I'm going to be using here, is both free and capable of doing batch editing, which the batch editing is a godsend, because if you're trying to do animations and you didn't have that, that would be a horrible, horrible nightmare. So very happy with that. So that said, let's just select all of our video files here and drag and drop them into AutoStakkert. Now, AutoStakkert's got a lot of options here, and I adjust some of them, but use a lot of defaults. But I'll tell you which is which whenever I'm going over that specific step in here. So let's just hop straight into it. Now, one of the first things that we're going to want to check when we drop something into AutoStakkert is this right box here with our framing. So AutoStakkert has already correctly identified that we're using a planet here for our video, and it's created this red box using these width and height parameters to encapsulate the entirety of the single image frame right here that we have from the video and keep the planet in the very center. So for my specific case, since we're using Ganymede here as part of the animation, and I know that Ganymede is going to be getting closer and closer to Jupiter, and this is the first video, so it's at its furthest point, it's only going to get closer. We're good with this framing. The framing is going to capture all of the stuff that I wanted to. If you needed to change the framing, you could adjust it with these little sliders here or in these input boxes. But do be aware that the bigger box you have for these height and width parameters, the longer it's going to take to process. And the more unused space that you have, the longer, or the more data that you're not actually processing is just kind of useless. But do be aware of that and make sure that these are fitting whatever specific situation you need. So, going over to the left here, image stabilization, we've already said that it's doing planetary. It's already recognizes this is good. If we were doing something like lunar or solar, we might want to hit surface here, but pretty self-explanatory. Dynamic background, we're just leaving that on, it's default. And same thing here with all of our quality estimation, we're just leaving all of this as default. The quality estimator, though, is a neat little tool that will sift through every individual frame of this first video and give you a plot of quality versus time, and then a secondary plot of just best to worst on frame quality. So this is normally pretty quick, and it's just popped up right there. So we can see that it's pretty consistent, but we might have had a couple dips where things could have gotten a little bit windier and a couple like stronger points where it might have been a little more still. If we click through this as well, we can actually see in our right frame over there what it thinks the really good frames are and the really bad frames are. And it'll also give you a little percentage, like where does this fit compared to the rest of them. So this is the 99.1% best frame, the top 99%, versus this one right here being in the top 1%. Or top, this is just singularly the best frame. So that's a nice little thing. And as for our distribution with the green line overlaid right here, we've got very few really, really good ones, and then kind of just a little gentle slope down, and very, very few really bad ones. So that's fairly typical as far as these distributions go. With our reference frame down here, we're just going to leave everything default and then move up here to the top right where we're going to select TIFF, because TIFF is a great, basically raw image format. Whereas PNG is kind of okay, but there's some programs later that really like TIFF, so we're just going to keep it TIFF all the way through. With these red boxes, it is not super obvious what these may mean at first glance. But with this right here, frame percentage to stack, and I have 80% right there input, that means we're going to take 80% of the frames within this first video and use them to create our first image. Now, that might not be super intuitive because we're doing lucky imaging. We're trying to get a ton of frames together so that we can cut through the atmospheric disruption and disturbance in order to get just that clear picture of the planet. So why are we using 80% of the frames? That is because of our noise here. In order to get a really high resolution image of the planet, I've stacked 2 Barlows, so I've dispersed the light across more pixels so that we have a higher resolution for the same brightness of a target. But in doing that, I also had to increase my gain up to 100 in order to preserve reasonable frame rates, which I was only getting about 20 FPS, which sounds horrible if you know any astrophotographers doing Planetary, but we're working with what we've got here, so just bear with me. But I had to raise my gain up, so each individual frame is going to be horribly, horribly noisy. And in order to get rid of that noise, we need to average it out with many, many more frames. So we're actually going to be using 80% of the frames here, and it's to mitigate that noise. So in really bad situations, like whenever there's a lot of turbulence or a lot of just refraction and stuff due to turbulence or heat, I would opt for something like maybe 60%, and on a really clear night with really calm, good conditions, that might be something more like 90%. But that's what we have in our first little green box right here. These other boxes are actually second runs. So say I've got 80% here, but I'm not specifically sure, do I want 80% or some other number? What I could do is hit 70 and like 60 and just try over whatever thing specifically. But since that's a entirely separate stack, the program will run through everything, create the 80% one, and then create the 70% one, and then create the 60% run, and that can eat up a lot of data and a lot of space and cost you a lot of time at the same time. So if you just follow the general rule, you should be in a good spot. But if you really need to try it, you can also put some stuff here. With the number of frames to stack at the top, that's just a flat version of the bottom numbers here. So if you wanted to use the top 500 frames per se, you could just input 500 there, and it works basically the same. Moving a little bit down now, we have normalized the stack to some parameter. You can change this parameter as well. But normalizing the stack in this case refers to the histogram stretch. So stretching the black point and the white point. So basically the ends of that histogram to get you roughly 70% of the entire area. So not super close to saturation, but if you were paying attention during the acquisition phase of this video, we were actually kind of aiming for 70 or 80%. So we already should basically be there. So I'm not going to leave this checked. For the sharpening beneath that, sharpening in AutoStakkert is not that great. I have very briefly, sometimes very rarely actually, had that actually come out better than some of my manual adjustments with wavelets and stuff later in Registax and onward. The reason why I do leave this check though is just because I've had like 2 times or 1 time or so on Saturn where it actually gave me basically as good of a result as I would have gotten. So I don't expect this to actually yield anything for Jupiter here, but I am actually going to leave that checked. And then blend raw for 5%. This is basically just a default. I'm just leaving that in. I'm actually not 100% sure on what specifically blending in the raw for that actually does. But moving on, aligning RGB. I do believe this is our white balance. So with our specific cameras, you may or may not want to have this one checked. Especially if you're doing filters, you might have some weird configuration going on. I would probably just try this with and without depending on your specific setup, but your mileage may vary, especially if you're using different filters capturing like the green channel and the blue channel and the red channel. But if you're already doing that, the scope of your stuff is probably way beyond this video. So just moving on to the next part here. So advanced settings, drizzle. Drizzle is great. We use drizzle in DSO astrophotography as well. And drizzle is basically a upscaling and resampling of some of our images here, which gives us a little bit more room to work with in our processing, but you also don't want to push too far. Pushing it too far both is really computationally intensive, like really computationally intensive, and it doesn't really get you anything once you go too far. So 1.5 times drizzle is a really nice, just medium spot. Good compromise. Jumping over to our right window, our primary point of interest here, aside from our height and width framing and stuff, is going to be our alignment points. So this little bar right here. So as you can see, we've got 0 alignment points right now, but if we hit place AP grid, it'll drop a bunch of points on there. The formula with which it drops these points on there is calibrated based on these 2 variables that we have here, AP size and minimum brightness. So we can tune, say, if we wanted the minimum brightness to be up at like 70 being just kind of a random unit, we can have that here, but we're going to really be using this one in particular to tune specific things to be included or excluded. So in my specific situation, we've got Ganymede over here, which is quite a bit dimmer than Jupiter. So we want to make sure that this is down at a rough level where we're going to get Ganymede included, just like that. As for AP size, you would think it would make sense to go with a really small AP size, like 24 right here, where you've got just a ton of alignment points all over the surface. But whenever you give it too many alignment points, it actually tries a little bit too hard, and it can actually end up creating these little stacking artifacts. And those don't look very good. As a general rule, I would try and advise you to have not 1.5K APs, but something more like 100 to maybe 250, or at least just like shy of like 400 or so. So I'm pretty good with that. I'm pretty good with that right there. 134 looks pretty reasonable, and we've got everything we want in the frame. So once we've got all those settings set and everything, it all looks good. And after we've applied our APs, it'll enable the stack button, and we'll just hit stack, and it'll run through and process all those videos for us. Now, I fortunately have already done this part. I can tell you because this, I did it the night that the night we got our data, and that took like 12 hours. In part because I had such a wide like cropping on the red box, but also just because we've got a lot of videos and a lot more than normal. For the output though, it's going to create a folder within that like video folder that you already had with the name AutoStakkert _ and then whatever your stacking parameters were. So in this case, it's %80, and then I have a 1 just to make sure I don't accidentally overwrite stuff. But here are our files. It creates a little additional one, your actual output, and then the one that ends in comb here is your sharpened version. So this right here is our just normal output. So this is equivalent to that the 80% of the frames of that first video. And this is the sharpened version, which is obviously quite a bit darker, but it's also kind of noisier too. It does not look great, but neither of these look great. It will look great though when we take everything to Registax, which is going to be our next program here. So I've actually separated out a bunch of the specific ones that we're looking for, so away from the additional files and the comb sharpened files. So now we just have our TIFFs here, as well as some preset output folders that we're going to be using. So Registax 6 here. Registax is a incredibly powerful tool. So we're going to turn this blurry kind of mess of an image. You can see there's a little bit of stuff kind of hiding in there, but we're going to turn this blurry mess of an image into a detail-rich, like sharpened guy. So let's just drag and drop a single one of these here. You just want to do a single because Registax actually has some stacking capabilities as well. So if you drop more than one in at the very start here, it might confuse it. But we're going to grab just one and then go over top here and hit show full image just so we can see everything, including Ganymede in the top right. And here's the most powerful part of Registax. It's this left side called wavelets. Wavelets are just magical. There's not like a real way to convey how powerful they are other than just demonstrating it. For setting the parameters for these guys, it's actually a little bit tricky. You kind of need to just do a bunch of iterations and figure out what settings are specifically going to work best for both A, your camera, and B, your target, and C, your imaging session in particular. Typically, you can have a wavelet scheme that will get you about there, but you may want to adjust them just a little bit as well after the fact. So just as an example, what we're going to do here is drag one of these sliders over just to somewhere around the middle. And you'll notice that didn't really do anything. And that's because you need to adjust these denoise and sharpen values as well. So if I go just from 0.1 to say like 0.6 on this guy, it pulls out a ton of detail from that. But it also makes it quite noisy. Fortunately, we have a remedy for that, and that is this denoise box over here. So if we pull that up to like 0.5 instead, we get a tremendously better image here. And you'll notice that there's only a certain sharpened area, and that's just because it's a little preview box. You can see defined by this little area here. If I click around these little indicators, but it's just doing this specific little preview area, so it doesn't have to compute this every single time you try and make a little change. But we go from this to this, and there's just, it's basically self-evident at that point. But you want to make your adjustments across these guys. Typically, you just leave all the settings up here as default. I think that's what everybody typically does. That's certainly what I do. And then just make your adjustments on these sliders as well as these little boxes and figure out what works best for you. You can also save your wavelet schemes, which I've done down here. So I'm just going to select my Jupiter ZWO 2.6. And this is my final scheme right here. So once I like that, I can just hit do all, and that'll turn us from preview to actually having the entire image be adjusted with the wavelet settings that we had. Additionally, Registax also has the ability to do some other edits over in the Functions tab on the right, if you can see that. Might have to move this down a little bit. Yeah, Functions tab right here. These guys allow you to do a couple different things, like editing the histogram for your brightness. This is what we were talking about stretching and stuff for the histogram before. Though I typically leave these as default, basically, since we've basically tried to account for some of this within my acquisition when we were doing our settings in SharpCap and stuff before that. RGB balance is another thing that's kind of nice on here. This is for your white balance specifically, if you're trying to get some things relatively evened out. Though, do be careful with not trying to scrunch those together too far, because you might actually mess with the true color of your images. Align RGB is a very, very handy tool if you have fringing on your target. So what do I mean by fringing? I mean part of your target is red and part of your target is blue. And by that I mean like this. So like the red part of the planet, or the part of the planet's red, part of the planet's blue, and that's because your channels are not adequately aligned. This can happen for a couple different reasons. You might actually have this happen because some of your hardware is not quite putting all of the light focusing on the same specific location, so you might just have a little bit of mismatch there. But if you have that, you can correct it here, though I'm just going to reset that because I don't have any of that. There are a couple different other tools, but I basically am just using the wavelets here. Like, you can adjust contrast and brightness and stuff, but I prefer to do that in some other programs as well. And also, I know how to do the wavelets in batch, but I don't necessarily know how to get the functions to work in batch. Like, I've tried them, but I haven't actually successfully gotten those to work. So this is just roughly what I'm going for here for this part. But I've mentioned batch, so how do we do batch? We go to Tools right here, and then open the Show Macro Batch window right here. So it basically does what the name suggests it does. It creates a little macro to batch process your images. So what that means is you'll create some string of commands, and it'll open an image, execute that string, open another image, execute that string, until you've finished the entire list of images that you've gotten. So one little thing to note, if you click Settings right here and hit Show Advanced Controls, it actually enables this Functions guy, which is the functions on the right here that I'm not sure how to do. I've added these guys before, didn't really do anything, not really sure, but just that's just a little quick note. Like, see, gone, returned. Okay, back to your regularly scheduled programming. Okay, so wavelet and wavelet save are the two things that we're really interested in here, because these are all stack related, these are just the wavelet related, and then this is the additional thing. So for wavelet, whenever you hit save here, it will grab the current wavelet settings that you have applied, and applied is an important word here, because if you just have it as the preview, it's not actually going to like grab the settings here. You have to hit do all. So once you've got your wavelet settings and hit do all, you can just hit save here to pull those wavelet settings over into the macro. So what I'm going to do here is just name this macro video, and we're just going to name this wavelet guy video as well, just because why not. And we're going to save, and then hit these double arrows on the right to add that to the macro command. And then for our wavelet save, once we apply them, we obviously want to save them. So I'm going to set this to a TIFF output, because the next program that we're probably going to drop this stuff in really likes TIFFs, doesn't really like PNGs. So TIFF format, and I'll just call this video as well. And we'll just hit double arrow again and then save that. So once we have all of that applied and save that there, we can now go to this drop down and find video right here, and that will grab everything that we've just saved. And then from there we can go to add files. With the file browser here that Registax normally does, it doesn't normally have a drop down for the specific like TIFF files and stuff that we're looking for. But if you actually want to find those, what you can do is do star.tiff, and it'll search all of the file format, or all the images with that file format. So what we're just going to do here is grab all of these guys and open them to add them to the list. And then we're just going to hit run. And you should be able to see right here, it's going to open up one of these images, go through to the wavelets, set all the wavelets like that. If my computer isn't super slow, because this is kind of an old laptop, admittedly, that's why the webcam is probably stuttering every now and then, or having a little bar. I've seen that. But yeah, and then it'll go through and it'll save, and then it'll go on to the next one. So just like that. And we will jump right back into it once this is done processing. Okay, and here we go. Finally about done. And there it is. Process completed. So all those save files should just be within the same folder, but with that prefix that we had added before, which in this case is going to be video. So we're just going to actually cut all of these guys and paste them into this other folder for Regi out that I've already made. Delete these guys, just some extra folders. There we go. Regi out. And that's all we need for Registax. So let's look what we've got now. That's pretty good. Things do look a tad washed out though. It looks like we've got a couple sharper images as well. Looks like it's varied a little bit across the night. But I do think we want to do some small minor adjustments here as well. So what we're going to do is take it into our next program called RawTherapee, which is basically just like a Photoshop-esque image adjustment software. So we can do things like black point, brightness, darkness, contrast, local contrast, tone mapping, like that sort of thing. So we've got our Regi out. Yep. Oh, that looks good. Make sure we're in the proper file here. Looks good. So what we can hit now is editor, and we can double click on our first file here. If we didn't save these as TIFFs and instead save them as PNGs, it actually wouldn't show up in this program because this program really likes TIFFs. But what we're going to do here is just make some mild adjustments to some of our stuff here. Tune the brightness down just a little bit. Tune the lightness down just a little bit. Pull the black levels up just a tad as well. Something about there. We also have a relatively healthy looking histogram there now that we did all that. So that looks pretty good there. So what we're going to do now that we've made those adjustments, is actually hop back into File Browser right here, and then select Batch Edit. And then from there, click on this little exposure box right there. And if you select some of these guys across here, what you'll be able to see is that while I'm on this first one, it has all of these little edits that we just made to saturation, brightness, contrast, everything, etc. But if we click a different one, it's going to go back to those default values, so the unadjusted numbers for them. But if we select the first guy and then all of them, it'll deselect these boxes that we've changed, but keep the first editor parameters. But if we go back and just click all of these guys, it's going to apply those edits across every single one of these images. And then from there we go to fast export. You can have dedicated or standard here. Just the big important thing, since we're barely doing any like real processing, there's tons and tons of options on here for like sharpening and micro contrast and everything, but we're just doing some simple stuff. The important thing to know here is that our resize is okay. So this needs to be at least as big as your file size. So if we go back to our editor, we can double check. We've got 1632 and 1272. So we go back to File Browser, 1632 and 1272. All that looks good. So then we just click this little gear button right here to add it to the fast queue. Go over to our queue settings right here. I have RT out set, so it should just be going into this little accompanying folder as well. I'm just going to leave it as PNG 16-bit TIFF. We originally captured the data in 8-bit, but I don't know if we actually technically made some additional adjustments since then. But since this is basically just going to be our final output, I am going to leave it as a TIFF here. And just leave it like that. So we're just going to click this button right here, which will start the queue. And that, at least compared to some of the other processing steps thus far, should be relatively quick. Though again, we do have plenty of Jupiters here. Additionally, after this step, or even before this step, you can technically use an additional piece of software if you're trying to stack a bunch of different rotated pictures into a single one. You can use something called WinJupos, which I'm not proficient at yet, so I'm not including it in this video. But that program actually does a bit of derotation. So whenever you take an image of a planet, you might notice that the center of that planet, where you're technically looking through the least atmosphere, or the most directly on, will actually be the sharpest, and you can actually stack a bunch of those with the planet's rotation in order to get super sharp single images. But that's not what we're going to do here. What we are going to do here is turn this little image set that we got now, minus the additional files that it created, but grab this little image set that we have here and drop these into one final piece of software called PIP, the Planetary Imaging Preprocessor. And PIP is fantastic for just turning these final images into a little animation. So make sure you grab them in order, because Pip cares about the order that you drag them in on, so grab them by the first thing whenever you click and drag them over. We're just going to hit Planetary Animation right here, and then go through some of our input options. All that looks good. I'm just hardly going to adjust anything here, but make sure we're not adjusting our histogram at all, since we've already done all the corrections that we want to on here. We'll leave these things on because I know it's going to satisfy these object detection limitations here, or requirements rather. And then for our playback, we're going to disable final play, do reverse play, and add 20 FPS. Since we've done really back-to-back quick videos, this should give us a really smooth looking final image, or final animation, sorry. So we'll just hit start processing. That should create a little pip folder here. And once that is done with all these little temps, it is going to have a final result for us. This also is typically a rather fast procedure, or part here. So we will have that in just a moment. There we go. So let's open that guy up and see what our final result's going to be. Try and move this down to make sure my camera's not in the way. That looks pretty good. We've got a reasonable amount of clarity even on this top area here, and obviously a ton of detail within the storms. There, yeah, you can definitely see the variation in the quality of the images over the night, but we've got both good detail on Jupiter and a good transition right there, where Ganymede actually falls into the shadow. And I was worried that it was just gonna kind of like fade out in brightness but remain circular the entire time, but it looks like we've got a really nice transition there. So I'm pretty happy with that. But hey, that is basically everything that I've got as far as my astrophotography process right now, at least until I incorporate WinJupos. Hopefully you guys get a great chance to go and get Jupiter as well. It is going to be at opposition basically at the end of this month. So this is a fantastic time to go out and try and get stuff. There's planetary events, so to speak, happening with the Galilean moons and Jupiter basically all the time. So try and go and capture those. I know I'm going to try and get some stuff with Ganymede and Io transiting in front of Jupiter here in just a little bit, in like four days, something like that, from the recording date. But hey guys, that's basically all I've got for y'all here. So hopefully you found it helpful, and thanks for watching. See you guys.